The sun was setting behind New York's towering skyline, painting the sky with soft hues of orange and gold. Inside an old, worn-out bus, Emma Carter gazed silently out the window, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Beside her, Sophie, her 9-year-old daughter, clutched a faded teddy bear, her quiet eyes watching the world pass by. They had come a long way to get here, not just in distance but in life. The past year had been a relentless storm for Emma. After the sudden death of her husband, everything crumbled. Her home, her job, her sense of security. But the most devastating loss wasn't physical. It was the sound of her daughter's voice. Since that day, Sophie had been trapped in silence, as if her words had vanished along with her father. Today, they were heading to Bennett Manor, where Emma had just accepted a job as a housekeeper. It wasn't ideal, but it was their only chance to start over. The bus slowed to a stop in front of an imposing iron gate. Beyond it, the grand mansion loomed, vast and magnificent, yet strangely cold and lifeless. Emma gently squeezed Sophie's hand, hoping to reassure her, though in truth, she needed the reassurance just as much. Neither of them knew that this house was about to change their lives forever. The iron gates creaked open slowly, their heavy groan echoing in the evening air. Emma held Sophie's hand as they stepped inside, making their way toward Bennett Manor. The mansion stood before them, grand yet hollow, as if it had once held warmth but had long since lost it. At the entrance, a middle-aged woman with neatly pinned silver hair awaited them. Mrs. Harper, the estate's longtime housekeeper, observed them with sharp but not unkind eyes. "Miss Carter? I'm Harper. Come inside." Emma nodded and guided Sophie through the towering front doors. The moment they stepped in, she felt the weight of silence pressing down on the house. "Mr. Bennett is rarely home in the evenings. You won't see him often. Your duties are simple. Keep the house clean, ensure everything runs smoothly, and..." Mrs. Harper hesitated before lowering her voice. "Most importantly, do not disturb young Lucas." Emma blinked. Lucas Bennett, the only son of Ethan Bennett, the master of the house. "How old is he?" Emma asked. 10, but he doesn't speak. Emma's breath caught for a moment. She cast a glance at Sophie. Her daughter had been the same way. Mrs. Harper led them to a modest room reserved for the household staff. "You may rest here. I'll show you your tasks in the morning." Emma set down their bags, feeling a small sense of relief, but before she could fully relax, Sophie tugged at her sleeve. The little girl pointed toward the end of the dimly lit hallway, where a boy with jet black hair stood, half hidden in the shadows. It was Lucas Bennett. The two children stared at each other in silence. Lucas said nothing. He simply watched Sophie. His dark eyes were empty, yet filled with unspoken emotions, as if he had just seen a reflection of himself in her. Emma took a cautious step forward, about to speak, but Lucas abruptly turned away and disappeared around the corner. Mrs. Harper let out a quiet sigh. "He's always like that. No one can get close to him." Emma squeezed Sophie's hand, an odd feeling settling in her chest. She knew that this was not going to be just a job. The first morning at Bennett Manor unfolded in an eerie silence. As Emma busied herself with chores, Sophie quietly drifted away, her small feet carrying her deeper into the long, cold hallways. The doors stretched endlessly, each one hiding a story she didn't yet know. She ran her fingers along the handles, feeling the chill of forgotten secrets beneath her touch. At the very end of the hallway, Sophie stopped. A heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. She hesitated only a moment before pushing it open. Dust filled the air, illuminated by the soft glow of daylight filtering through thick curtains. In the center of the room stood a grand piano, veiled under an old white cloth. Sophie approached it, wide-eyed with curiosity. With both hands, she carefully peeled the cloth away, revealing the sleek black and ivory keys beneath. Then, without a second thought, she pressed down on a single key. The note rang out, clear, pure, yet strangely lonely in the vast emptiness. A sharp movement caught her attention. Sophie spun around. Lucas Bennett stood in the corner of the room. His eyes were wide, his face pale. He looked startled, almost afraid, as if something had been awakened within him. He took a small step back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his gaze locked onto the piano. Sophie did not move. She simply stood there, watching him in return. For a brief, fleeting second, they spoke without words. Lucas stiffened, his breath uneven. He stared at Sophie, his dark eyes flickering with something unreadable. Recognition? Fear? Longing? For a brief moment, it seemed like he might stay. But then, like a shadow retreating from the light, he took a step back, then another, and then he was gone. Sophie remained where she was, a quiet wonder flickering in her eyes. Far away, Emma had no idea that an invisible thread had just been woven between two lost souls. After the incident in the music room, Lucas avoided Sophie. He didn't look at her, didn't come near her, but he no longer ignored her presence completely either. Emma noticed Lucas was no longer just a silent shadow in Bennett Manor. He was beginning to feel again. But Ethan Bennett was different. "I don't want music in this house." His voice was firm and heavy when Emma entered the library, where he spent most of his evenings. Emma paused, sensing the invisible walls he had built around himself. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Ethan turned toward the window, his gaze sharp yet haunted. "Because music reminds me of what I've lost." A long silence stretched between them. "But it could also help you find what's still here," Emma said gently, her eyes drifting toward Lucas, who sat sketching in the garden. Ethan didn't reply, but Emma saw the way his fingers tightened against the desk. The nightmare came for Lucas on a cold winter night. He shot up in bed, breath ragged, tiny hands clutching the blanket. His heart pounded wildly against his chest, the ghost of his dream lingering like a shadow. Without thinking, Lucas ran. His small feet carried him to the only place where he felt safe. The door to Emma and Sophie's room swung open. Emma awoke with a start, her eyes widening at the sight of Lucas standing there, trembling from head to toe. Sophie stirred beside her mother, her wide eyes full of concern. Before anyone could react, Lucas rushed forward, throwing his arms around Sophie. He was shaking uncontrollably, his breath uneven, as if he had just escaped a terrible nightmare. Sophie stiffened for only a second, but then, slowly, gently, she raised her hands and rubbed his back. She didn't speak, she couldn't, but she held him tighter, offering comfort in the only way she knew how. Emma felt her throat tighten, emotion welling up inside her. Sophie, the girl who had never let anyone in besides her mother, was now holding Lucas, soothing him with the warmth of her embrace. Lucas didn't let go. He buried his face against her shoulder, silent tears falling down his cheeks. Sophie didn't pull away. She squeezed him tighter, as if saying, "I understand. I've been afraid too." Emma swallowed hard, kneeling beside them, placing a gentle hand on both their backs. In the dimly lit hallway, Ethan stood, frozen. No longer just two lost children navigating a lonely world, Lucas and Sophie had found each other. For the first time, Ethan realized his son was no longer alone. Since that night, everything in Bennett Manor began to change. Lucas no longer avoided Sophie. He never spoke, but every day, when the house settled into its familiar silence, Lucas quietly made his way to the music room, where Sophie was already waiting. They didn't need words. Music was their language. At first, Lucas was hesitant. His fingers would barely graze the keys before pulling away, but Sophie never laughed, never pressured. She simply waited. Day by day, he grew bolder. His hands no longer hesitated over the keys. One evening, as Sophie played beside him, he closed his eyes and let his fingers move freely. The notes came, not from memory, but from feeling. And then, for the first time, Sophie laughed. A small, bright sound, like the chime of a delicate bell. Lucas froze. Then, slowly, he smiled. From a distance, Ethan watched. He no longer forbade it. At first, he remained an outsider, but over time, he realized he could no longer ignore what was happening before him. One evening, Emma placed a cup of tea on the table beside Ethan as he sat in the library. "You can go into that room if you want." Her voice was soft. Ethan looked at her, hesitation flickering in his eyes. "I don't think I'm ready." Emma didn't push. She understood his pain, because she had lived it herself. She sat across from him, her fingers tightening around the warmth of her tea. "Have you ever felt like the world just moved on without you?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan stilled. No one had ever asked him that before. "Every day," he admitted, for the first time sounding tired. She left, but everything else, work, life, it just kept going without her. Emma nodded. She understood. "I lost my husband in an accident." Her voice faltered slightly. "One moment he was holding my hand, the next I was standing alone at the hospital, staring at a doctor who couldn't meet my eyes." She let out a shaky breath. No warning, no time to say goodbye. And all I could do was watch as life continued moving forward without him. Ethan was silent, but for the first time, the coldness in his gaze softened. Emma gave a small, sad smile. "You know what hurt the most? Realizing that I didn't just lose my husband, but Sophie lost her voice." Ethan stared at her. "She hasn't spoken since then?" Emma shook her head, as if she was afraid that if she did, the world would shatter all over again. Something in Ethan shifted. Lucas was the same. Two lost souls, each carrying a different grief, finally saw pieces of themselves in each other. From then on, Ethan began to change. He no longer avoided music. At night, he sat closer to the music room, listening to the melodies Lucas and Sophie played. One evening, as Emma passed the library, she saw Ethan standing just outside the music room, a strange softness in his eyes. "Do you want to go in?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer, but this time, instead of turning away, he stepped inside. Emma smiled faintly, knowing that this was the moment Ethan finally began to face his past. Music had become a part of Bennett Manor. Every afternoon, Lucas and Sophie sat by the piano, slowly searching for their own melodies. At first, their notes were scattered, hesitant, but as time passed, they flowed together, like pieces of a story waiting to be told. Ethan no longer watched from a distance. One evening, he stepped into the music room, his hand brushing lightly against the polished surface of the piano, as if touching a memory he had tried to bury for too long. Emma sat nearby, quietly observing. "You miss her a lot, don't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't look up, but he nodded. "She was everything to me." Emma understood. She knew the feeling, the pain of losing a part of yourself and being powerless to bring it back. "You haven't really lost her," she said softly. "She's still here, in every note Lucas plays." Ethan took a deep breath. For the first time, he didn't run from his pain. That night, a nightmare pulled Lucas from his sleep. He bolted upright, his breath ragged, heart pounding against his ribs. Without thinking, Lucas ran to the music room, as if it were the only safe place he had left. Ethan heard the hurried footsteps and rushed after him. When he arrived, Lucas was already at the piano, his small hands trembling over the keys. Emma and Sophie stood nearby. No one spoke. They simply waited. And then, in the quiet of the night, Lucas played. The music wasn't perfect. It wasn't even structured. But every note carried something raw, fear, pain, and a desperate longing to be free. Ethan couldn't hold back anymore. He moved forward, kneeling in front of his son. "Lucas," his voice cracked. "You're safe, I'm here." Lucas hesitated. His eyes glistened with tears. He looked at his father for a long time before, for the first time in years, he spoke. "Dad." Ethan broke down. Without hesitation, he pulled Lucas into his arms, holding him tightly, as if letting go meant losing him all over again. Sophie watched, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Emma knelt beside her daughter, squeezing her tiny hand. And then another miracle happened. Sophie's lips parted, her voice small but clear. "Ma." Emma froze. Her heart shattered and mended all at once. She pulled Sophie into her arms, sobbing. Both children had found their voices again. In that quiet room, beneath the gentle glow of the night, two broken families became whole once more. The next morning, the sun rose earlier than usual. Golden rays spilled through the grand windows of Bennett Manor, no longer casting shadows, but filling the house with warmth. In the music room, Lucas sat at the piano, Sophie beside him. For the first time, the two children played a song together, one they had created themselves. Ethan stood by the door, listening. His eyes were no longer cold, instead they shone with quiet pride and peace. Emma stepped up beside him. "Are you ready to move forward?" she asked. Ethan looked at her, then at his son. For the first time in years, he nodded. "I think I've finally found what truly matters." Emma smiled softly. She didn't ask what that was, because she already knew. Ethan turned to her, holding her gaze. "And you, Emma? Are you ready to start again?" Emma's fingers tightened around the fabric of her dress. She thought about the past, the grief, the loss, and then about the present, where she now stood. Her eyes landed on Sophie, laughing as she played the piano. She took a deep breath. "Yes, I think I am." Bennett Manor, once silent and hollow, was now filled with music, laughter, and, most importantly, voices that had once been lost. The dawn had arrived, and a new beginning had truly begun. 1 year later, spring had returned to Bennett Manor. The lush green trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the sweet scent of blooming flowers filled the garden. No longer cold and lifeless, the manor was now filled with warmth, laughter, and music. In the music room, Lucas and Sophie sat together at the grand piano. There was no hesitation, no silence, just two children who had found their voices again. "Let's play this one," Sophie pointed excitedly at a sheet of music. Lucas nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Okay, but don't play too fast this time." Emma stood at the door, quietly watching. Her heart swelled with joy at the sight of the two children chatting as if they had never been trapped in silence. She turned to Ethan, who stood beside her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "Are you ready to move forward?" Emma asked gently. Ethan looked at her, then at his son, Lucas, who had once been lost in his own world, but was now laughing beside Sophie. He took a deep breath before slowly nodding. "I think I've finally found what truly matters." Emma smiled, her eyes shimmering with happiness. Ethan held her gaze for a long moment. Then, suddenly, he dropped to one knee. Emma gasped as he pulled out a ring, simple yet beautiful. "Emma, life is full of loss, but it's also full of miracles. You, Lucas, Sophie, you all brought that miracle into my life. I want to continue this story with you as a real family. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy welled in Emma's eyes. She glanced at Lucas and Sophie, who were beaming with excitement. "Say yes, Mom. We'll always be together," Sophie giggled. "Yeah, and I want to call her Mom too," Lucas added eagerly, making Emma laugh through her tears. Emma knelt down, her hands trembling, but her heart had never been more certain. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes glistening with something new, not just love, but hope. "Yes, Ethan, because for the first time in a long time, I believe in tomorrow." Bennett Manor, once a house of sorrow and silence, had become a true home, filled with love, laughter, and happiness. A new family had truly been born,